Before anybody woke up, there was a document. The document was 93 pages long. It had no cover sheet, no letterhead, no author attribution. It arrived at the offices of a mid-sized financial investigations firm in London on February 11th, 2022, sealed inside a waterproof envelope that had been left on the doorstep sometime between midnight and 6 in the morning. No courier record, no postmark, no fingerprints. The first analyst who opened it read the first page, stopped, and called her supervisor. Her supervisor read the first 3 pages, closed the document, and locked it in a safe. By noon that day, the firm's senior partners had assembled in a conference room with the doors closed. By evening, they had contacted a former intelligence officer they sometimes consulted on sensitive matters. By the following morning, they had retained a criminal defense attorney, not because they had committed a crime, because they weren't sure, after reading 93 pages, whether the person described in the document was guilty of one, or whether he had done something far stranger than any crime they'd ever encountered. The document was a financial audit, unofficial, unauthorized, compiled as far as anyone could determine by someone who had once had deep access to the private accounts of a man named Darian Marsh. If you recognize that name, you know more than most people. Darian Marsh was not famous. He was not a public figure in any meaningful sense. He did not appear on magazine covers or speak at conferences or tweet about innovation. He was, in the taxonomy of the ultra-wealthy, what insiders sometimes call a ghost billionaire, a person whose fortune is real, verifiable, and enormous, but whose public presence is almost non-existent. Marsh controlled a network of companies spanning energy infrastructure, advanced materials, and biomedical research. His net worth, according to the most reliable private estimates, was approximately $19 billion. He lived in a compound in the mountains of British Columbia that he had purchased in 2008 and had barely left since. He communicated through attorneys, proxies, and a personal chief of staff named Renata Calloway, who had worked for him for 14 years and was one of perhaps 6 people in the world who spoke to him regularly. Darian Marsh was, by all available evidence, a private man running a legitimate empire. And then the document arrived, and buried in its 93 pages, between forensic analyses of wire transfers and corporate structures, was a single line item that changed everything. $103 million. Moved in 17 separate transactions over a period of 4 years, routed through shell companies in 4 jurisdictions, and directed to a destination that the document's author had been unable to identify. $103 million spent on something that no one, not Marsh's board, not his CFO, not his attorneys, could account for. That was where the story began. Or rather, that was where the story surfaced, because the real beginning was much earlier and much darker. And to understand it, you have to go back. You have to go back to a woman named Ellis Yun. Ellis Yun was a forensic accountant, 41 years old, educated at the London School of Economics, 12 years of experience tracking financial irregularities for banks, regulators, and private clients. She was methodical, precise, and allergic to speculation. Her colleagues described her as the kind of person who wouldn't say a building was on fire until she'd personally verified the chemical composition of the smoke. In March of 2020, Ellis was hired by a former executive of one of Marsh's subsidiary companies, a man named Gregor Tanis, to conduct a private financial review. Tanis had recently been pushed out of the company under circumstances he described as abrupt and unexplained. He suspected financial misconduct at the highest levels and wanted someone to look at the numbers. Ellis took the job. She expected to find the usual things: inflated expenses, unreported liabilities, maybe some creative tax structuring, the kind of financial misconduct that was depressingly common among the ultra-wealthy. But she did not find the usual things. What she found over the course of 18 months of painstaking work was the $103 million. And the deeper she dug into where that money had gone, the more the world around her began to shift in ways she could not explain. Wait, I think I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the building first. In 2016, a construction company called Boreal Dynamics, a company with no public profile, no website, and no clients other than entities linked to Darien Marsh, broke ground on a project in a remote region of northern British Columbia. The project was permitted under the vague classification of Private Research Facility, a designation that in that jurisdiction required minimal public disclosure. The facility was built over a period of 2 years. Construction crews were flown in on private aircraft and housed on site for the duration of their contracts. They were not told who owned the facility. They were not permitted to bring personal phones or cameras. They signed non-disclosure agreements with penalty clauses that one worker later described anonymously as the most terrifying legal document I've ever read. The facility was completed in late 2018. From the air, it was nearly invisible, designed to blend with the surrounding forest, with structures that were partially underground and partially concealed beneath engineered canopy cover. Satellite imagery from the period shows what appears to be undisturbed wilderness. 3 construction workers, contacted independently by Ellis Yoon's investigation, provided fragments of information about what they had built. Their accounts were consistent in broad terms, though each had worked on a different section, and none had seen the complete plans. One described building a network of underground corridors connecting several structures, each separated by heavy blast-rated doors. Another described installing medical-grade air filtration and water purification systems, far exceeding what any research station would require. The third described something that he found deeply unsettling, but couldn't fully articulate. He had been part of a team that installed what he called the chamber, a large room deep underground whose walls were lined with a material he didn't recognize. It wasn't concrete, it wasn't steel, it was dark, almost black with a faintly reflective surface. The room was approximately 40 feet square and 20 feet high, and it contained no furniture, no equipment, and no visible purpose. When he asked his supervisor what the room was for, the supervisor said, "You're not being paid to ask questions." The worker said something else, too, something that Ellis noted in her files with a question mark beside it. He said that during the final week of construction, a series of crates arrived at the facility. They were delivered by a convoy of unmarked vehicles and unloaded by a team that was not part of the regular construction crew. The crates were large. Some of them required forklifts to move, and they were labeled with codes rather than descriptions. One of the crates, the worker noticed, was refrigerated. He didn't know what was inside it. Nobody did. Or if they did, they weren't talking. Ellis Yoon traced the financial trail of the facility's construction. The costs were staggering. The land acquisition alone was $14 million. Construction, $31 million. Equipment and materials, $28 million. Personnel, security, and logistics, $18 million. That accounted for approximately $91 million of the $103 million. The remaining $12 million had been spent on something else entirely. Something that Ellis could trace only to a single wire transfer made in January of 2019 to an account held by an entity called the Peregrine Trust, registered in Liechtenstein. The Peregrine Trust had no employees, no physical address, and no apparent purpose other than to receive this single payment, $12 million sent to a ghost. Ellis hit a wall. She could trace money, but she couldn't trace purpose. She knew where the $103 million had gone,
to build and equip a hidden facility in the wilderness and to fund a mysterious trust, but she didn't know why. And Darian Marsh was not the kind of person you could simply ask. So Ellis did what good investigators do. She started talking to people. Not Marsh's inner circle. They were insulated, protected, silent. She started at the edges. Former employees, contractors, service providers, anyone who had orbited Marsh's world and left it. Most of them said nothing useful. Marsh was private. Marsh was demanding. Marsh paid well and expected discretion. Standard billionaire boilerplate. But 3 conversations stood out. The first was with a woman named Dr. Lucia Ferreira. Dr. Ferreira was a neuroscientist. She had been recruited by one of Marsh's biomedical research companies in 2015 to work on what she was told was a project related to cognitive preservation, the study of how to maintain brain function in aging populations. It was legitimate research, well-funded, and Dr. Ferreira was enthusiastic about it. She worked on the project for 2 years. During that time, she published several papers, attended conferences, and interacted with colleagues in the normal way. But in 2017, she was asked to transfer to a different division within the company, a division she had never heard of, a division that, when she searched the company's internal directory, did not appear to exist. She was told the work was an extension of her current research. She was told it would require relocation to a private facility. She was told the compensation would be doubled. She asked where the facility was. She was told that information would be provided after she signed a new employment contract and NDA. Dr. Ferreira declined. She told Ellis that the decision was instinctive. Nothing about the offer was overtly threatening, but something about it felt wrong. The vagueness, the insistence on signing before receiving basic information, the way her supervisor's demeanor changed when she said no, not angry, but cold, distant, as if she had failed a test. She resigned 2 months later. When she tried to access her research files before leaving, she found that they had been moved to a restricted server. Her access had been revoked. She never saw her own work again. The second conversation was with a man Ellis called Mr. Hale in her notes. Mr. Hale was a former security contractor who had worked at the British Columbia facility for approximately 7 months in 2019, after construction was complete and the facility was operational. Mr. Hale was reluctant to talk. Ellis spent 3 months persuading him. When he finally agreed, he insisted on meeting in person in a public place with no recording devices. They met at a cafe in Vancouver. Mr. Hale told Ellis that the facility was staffed by a rotating team of approximately 30 people, security, maintenance, medical personnel, and a group of individuals he described as researchers, though he was never told what they were researching. The researchers lived on site full-time. They did not leave. They did not receive visitors. Their section of the facility was separated from the rest by the blast-rated doors the construction worker had described, and security personnel were prohibited from entering without explicit authorization from Marsh himself. Mr. Hale said that he never saw what happened in the research section, but he heard things. Not sounds of distress, not screams or machinery or anything so dramatic. He heard music. Specifically, he heard a single sustained tone, a low, resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate through the walls of the facility at irregular intervals. It would last for several hours and then stop. During these periods, the researchers did not emerge for meals or breaks. The facility's power consumption, which Mr. Hale could monitor from the security station, would spike dramatically. He asked his supervisor about the tone. His supervisor said, "Don't worry about it." Mr. Hale said there was one other thing. Twice during his time at the facility, Darian Marsh visited in person. Both visits were unannounced. Marsh arrived by helicopter, accompanied by Renata Calloway and a man Mr. Hale did not recognize, older, perhaps 70, carrying a metal case. During both visits, Marsh went directly to the research section and did not emerge for over 24 hours. When he came out, Mr. Hale said, Marsh looked different. Not ill, exactly, but altered. Mr. Hale struggled to describe it. His eyes, he said, they were, I don't know how to say this without sounding crazy, they were too focused, like he was seeing things in the room that weren't there, or like he was seeing things that were there, but that the rest of us couldn't see. Mr. Hale quit shortly after the second visit. He moved to a different province. He told Ellis that he still sometimes heard the tone in his dreams, that low, sustained frequency vibrating through walls that weren't there. The third conversation was the most disturbing. It was with a former personal physician of Darian Marsh. Ellis called her Dr. S in her notes. Dr. S had served as Marsh's private doctor from 2012 to 2019, a 7-year period that encompassed the planning, construction, and activation of the facility. Dr. S agreed to speak to Ellis on the condition that the conversation would never be attributed to her by name and that Ellis would never contact her again. Dr. S said that during her years as Marsh's physician, she had observed a gradual but unmistakable change in him. When she began treating him in 2012, Marsh was a typical aging billionaire, 61 years old, generally healthy, some cardiac concerns, mild cognitive decline consistent with his age. He was sharp, focused, and intense, but recognizably human. He made jokes, complained about back pain, asked about her family. By 2019, something had changed. His physical health had improved dramatically. His cardiac markers were those of a man 20 years younger. His cognitive testing scores were not just stable, but had actually increased, something that, in Dr. S's experience, was essentially unprecedented in a man approaching 70. But his personality had shifted.
He had become, Dr. S said, remote, not cold exactly, not hostile, but distant in a way that felt qualitatively different from simple introversion. He stopped making small talk. He stopped asking personal questions. His responses to her medical inquiries became shorter, more precise, and strangely formal, as if he was translating his thoughts from some other language before speaking them aloud. And then there were the scans. Dr. S performed routine neurological imaging on Marsh as part of his annual physical. In 2017, she noticed something anomalous, a small area of unusual density near the base of his skull. Not a tumor, not a lesion, but something. She flagged it for follow-up. At the next appointment, Marsh told her the anomaly had been addressed and that she should not include it in his records. She pressed him. She was his doctor. She needed to understand what it was. Marsh looked at her, and she told Ellis that in that moment, for the first time in 5 years, she was afraid of him. Not because he threatened her, not because he raised his voice, because something in his eyes, the way they focused on her, the absolute stillness of his expression, communicated without words that she had reached a boundary that she should not cross. She dropped the subject. But at his next annual scan, the anomaly was different. It was larger, and it appeared to be connected to the surrounding neural tissue in ways that Dr. S could not explain. It looked, she told Ellis, less like a foreign object and more like a part of his brain that hadn't been there before, a new structure, growing. Dr. S requested a consultation with a specialist. Marsh refused. He told her that the matter was being handled by other physicians and that her involvement was no longer required. 3 months later, her contract was terminated. She was paid a substantial severance and presented with an NDA. She signed it. She told Ellis one more thing before ending the conversation. In 2018, during Marsh's annual physical, the last one she conducted, she had drawn blood for routine testing. The results were normal, except for one thing. One of his blood samples contained trace quantities of a compound she could not identify. She sent it to a lab for analysis.
The lab reported that the compound did not match any known pharmaceutical, biological marker, or environmental contaminant in their database. It was, as far as the lab could determine, a substance that did not exist in medical literature. Dr. S asked the lab to run the analysis again. Same result. She never found out what it was. Ellis Yun compiled all of this, the financial trail, the construction records, the testimonies, into the 93-page document. She gave it to Gregor Tanis, who had hired her. Tanis read it and decided he had nothing to do with it. He told Ellis he had originally suspected simple financial fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, the mundane crimes of the wealthy. What she had uncovered was something else entirely. I wanted to find out if he was stealing money, Tanis told her. I didn't want to find out that he was building some kind of, I don't even know what to call it, a laboratory? Temple? I don't know what's happening in that facility, and I don't want to know. He paid Ellis her fee and asked her to destroy her files. She didn't. Instead, she printed the document. She sealed it in a waterproof envelope, and she left it on a doorstep in London. I know this because Ellis Yun told me. She told me in September of 2022, 7 months after the document surfaced. She had contacted the investigations firm herself, anonymously, to see what they had done with her findings. When she learned that the firm had conducted a preliminary review but decided not to pursue an investigation, citing insufficient evidence of criminal activity and significant legal risk, she was not surprised. She was, she told me, resigned. I spent 18 months following the money, she said. I can tell you exactly where $103 million went. I can tell you who built the facility and what it looks like. I can tell you that Darian Marsh's brain is changing in ways that his own doctor couldn't explain, and that his blood contains a substance that doesn't exist in any medical database. She paused. What I can't tell you is what it all means, and that's the part that frightens me. Not the money, not the facility, not even the thing growing in his brain. What frightens me is the possibility that he found something, or built something, or became something that the rest of us don't have a framework to understand. I asked her what she thought was happening in the facility, what the researchers were doing, what the tone was, what the chamber with the dark walls was for. She shook her head. I'm an accountant, she said. I follow money. I don't follow whatever this is. I asked her if she thought Darian Marsh was dangerous. She was quiet for a long time. I think he was a man, she said finally. A normal man. Brilliant, wealthy, but human. And I think that at some point, maybe in that facility, maybe before, he started to become something else. Something he chose to become, or something that was done to him, or something he discovered and couldn't resist. She paused again. And I think the $100 million wasn't the secret. The $100 million was just the cost of building a door. A door to what? She looked at me with an expression I will never forget. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the look of someone who has seen the edge of a map and knows that beyond it, the cartographer had nothing left to draw. I don't know, she said, but he walked through it, and I don't think he came back. Darian Marsh is still alive, as far as anyone knows. He is still in his compound in British Columbia, or in the facility, or somewhere in between. Renata Calloway still manages his affairs. His companies still operate. His fortune still grows.
But his last verified communication with anyone outside his inner circle was in late 2020, a brief, typed message to a board member of one of his companies, approving a quarterly budget. The message was 3 sentences long. It was perfectly clear, perfectly precise. The board member told a colleague afterward that something about the message bothered him, though he couldn't say what. Didn't sound like Marsh, he said. It sounded like someone who remembered what Marsh sounded like. The facility in British Columbia still operates. The power consumption data, accessible through provincial energy records,
shows that the facility draws an extraordinary amount of electricity, enough to power a small town. The consumption spikes at irregular intervals, lasting several hours each time. During those spikes, if you were standing in the forest above the facility, which no one is because the land for miles in every direction is privately owned and patrolled, you might feel something. Not hear it, feel it. A vibration, low, resonant, moving through the ground, through the trees, through the bones of your chest. The tone, still playing after all these years. Whatever door Darian Marsh built with his $100 million, whatever he found on the other side, whatever is growing in the chamber with the dark walls and humming through the earth at frequencies that human ears were never meant to process, it's still there. It's still running. And the only person who knows what it is has not been seen by the outside world in over 2 years. The money has been spent. The door has been opened. The secret is buried under $100 million and 60 feet of earth, and the silence of everyone who was paid enough to forget what they saw. But the tone doesn't forget, just keeps playing. And if Darian Marsh is still listening, if some version of him is still sitting in that facility, connected to whatever he built, seeing things the rest of us can't see, then maybe the secret was never really about the money. Maybe the money was just the price of admission, and the real secret, the one that terrified everyone who got close enough to glimpse it, is what he became after he paid it. Something is humming in the mountains of British Columbia tonight. Something that used to be a man. Something that spent $100 million to stop being one. And no one is going to check, because the last person who got close enough to listen is still hearing the tone in her dreams. And she will hear it, she told me, for the rest of her life. Some doors, once opened, don't close. Some sounds, once heard, don't stop. And some secrets, once uncovered, follow you home. This one followed me. I hear it now sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet enough. A low hum at the edge of perception. Barely there, almost nothing. Almost. I tell myself it's nothing. The pipes in the building, traffic on a distant highway, the ordinary mechanical breath of the world. But it's always the same frequency, and it never quite stops.